The notification pinged at 2:17 a.m. A sharp sound that sliced through the silence of my tiny apartment. I swiped left without a second thought, dismissing the profile of a man whose intense green eyes seemed to demand more than I was ready to give. Little did I know, that fleeting rejection on a dating app would haunt me 3 years later, standing in a bookstore, face to face with the same man now my mentor, and the source of attention I couldn't escape. My name is Ethan Caldwell, 28, a struggling writer in Portland, Oregon, chasing a dream that felt more like a mirage with every rejection letter. I'd moved here after college, lured by the city's artsy vibe and promise of inspiration. But all I'd found were dead-end barista jobs and a string of failed dates. That night in 2022, swiping through profiles, I was jaded, my heart bruised from a breakup that left me skeptical of love. His profile: Jameson, 39, bookstore owner, lover of poetry and quiet nights, felt too polished, too serious. I swiped left, convinced he was out of my league, and went to bed. Fast forward to 2025, and I was standing in Powell's Books, clutching a worn notebook, waiting to meet the mentor assigned to me by a local writing program. I'd applied on a whim, desperate to salvage my novel, a messy draft about identity and belonging that refused to come together. The program paired me with Jameson Harper, a celebrated author and bookstore owner known for his sharp critiques and reclusive charm. When he walked in, my stomach dropped. Those green eyes, that quiet intensity, it was him, the man I'd rejected without a thought. Ethan, right? Jameson's voice was low, warm, like whiskey over ice. He extended a hand, his gaze locking onto mine with a flicker of recognition I couldn't place. Did he know? My throat tightened as I shook his hand, his grip firm, lingering a beat too long. Let's get started, he said, leading me to a corner table piled with books. The air between us crackled, not with hostility, but something else, something unspoken that made my pulse race. We dove into my manuscript, his feedback cutting but fair. He saw through my half-baked metaphors, calling out every weak line with a precision that stung and thrilled me. You're hiding, he said, tapping a page. Your characters don't trust themselves, and neither do you. I wanted to argue, but his words hit too close to home. I'd spent years hiding me queerness from my conservative family, my dreams from a world that didn't care. How did he see it so clearly? As weeks passed, our mentorship sessions became the highlight of my life. Jameson's bookstore, Harper's Haven, was a refuge of creaky floors and leather-bound books, smelling of coffee and old paper. We'd sit for hours, dissecting my work, our conversations veering into late-night debates about life, love, and the courage to be seen. He shared glimpses of his pasta childhood in rural Montana, coming out in a town that didn't understand, building a life on his own terms. I listened, captivated, feeling a pull I couldn't name. But the tension was there, always. A brush of hands as we passed a book, a lingering glance when he thought I wasn't looking. I'd catch myself staring at the way his jaw tightened when he read, or how his laugh softened his sharp edges. Was it just me? I couldn't tell. I'd rejected him once, and now he was my mentor, untouchable, professional, yet impossibly close. The irony wasn't lost on me. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, he leaned back, studying me. Why do you hold back, Ethan? He asked, his voice softer than usual. You're writing. Your life fights like you're afraid to want what you want. My chest tightened. I wanted to tell him everything about the app, the swipe, the way I regretted it now. Instead, I mumbled something about needing time and fled into the rainy Portland night, my heart pounding with what I couldn't say. The rain didn't stop for days, mirroring the storm inside me. I avoided Harper's Haven, dodging Jameson's texts about our next session, claiming I was busy with rewrites. Truth was, I was unraveling, caught between the guilt of that long-ago swipe and the growing ache of wanting him now. I'd always been good at running. Growing up in Boise, Idaho, I'd learned to keep my head down, to hide who I was from a family that saw my queerness as a phase to be fixed. My dad, a pastor, once told me love was a choice, and I was choosing wrong. I left home at 18, chasing freedom, but freedom came with loneliness. Portland was supposed to be my fresh start, but I carried that fear of rejection everywhere, even into that fleeting swipe 3 years ago. Now, facing Jameson, it felt like fate was laughing at me. When I finally returned to the bookstore, Jameson was waiting, his expression unreadable. "You ghosted me," he said, not unkindly, as he handed me a coffee. "Care to explain?" I stammered. "My excuse is flimsy." He didn't push, just gestured to the table where my manuscript sat, marked with his meticulous notes. We worked in silence at first, the air heavy with unspoken questions. His presence steady, commanding made it hard to focus. Every time his hand brushed mine, reaching for a pen, I felt a jolt I couldn't ignore. That night, he suggested we grab dinner to talk shop. We ended up at a small diner, neon lights buzzing, the kind of place where time felt suspended. Over burgers and fries, he opened up more than usual. He told me about his first book, a queer coming-of-age story that nearly broke him to write. I was terrified, he admitted, his eyes distant. But I had to tell the truth, even if it hurt. I wanted to ask if he'd ever been hurt by love, by rejection, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I shared my own truth. Haltingly, I told him about Boise, about the weight of my family's expectations, about how writing was the only way I knew to make sense of myself. He listened, really listened, his gaze never wavering. When I mentioned my fear of failure, he leaned forward, his voice low. "Failure's just a draft. Ethan, you keep rewriting until it's right." It was the kind of advice that felt bigger than writing, like he was seeing me in a way no one else had. As we walked back to the bookstore, the city alive with late-night energy, I felt bold. "Jameson," I started, my voice shaky. "Did you ever feel something for someone and not know how to say it?" He stopped, turning to face me under a streetlight. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I thought he'd close the distance between us. Instead, he smiled, almost sadly. "All the time," he said, "but timing matters. And trust." He walked on, leaving me breathless, wondering what he meant. Back at my apartment, I couldn't sleep. I opened the dating app, long dormant, and searched for his profile. It was gone, deleted. My rejection hadn't just been a swipe, had been a door I'd slammed shut. Now, standing on the other side, I wasn't sure how to open it again. The next session was different. Jameson was quieter, his critique sharper, like he was holding something back. I wondered if I'd crossed a line with my question, if I'd exposed too much. But when he handed me a poetry collection, Walt Whitman, dog-eared and worn, I saw a note in his handwriting: "Read Song of Myself. Find your voice." It felt personal, like a challenge and an invitation. I threw myself into rewriting, pouring my fears into my novel's protagonist, a young man grappling with his identity in a world that demanded conformity. Jameson's feedback was relentless but inspiring, pushing me to dig deeper. One evening, as we debated character motivations, he asked, "What's your protagonist afraid of most?" I hesitated, then said, "Being seen, and not being enough." He nodded, his expression softening. "That's universal," he said, "but it's also yours." Our sessions grew longer, spilling into late nights. The bookstore became our world, a cocoon where I could be myself. I started noticing things about Jameson, the way he'd hum softly while shelving books, the scar above his eyebrow he never explained, the way he'd pause before answering personal questions, like he was weighing every word. I wanted to know more, but I was terrified of pushing too far. Then came the open mic night. Jameson hosted one monthly at Harper's Haven, and he'd convinced me to read a chapter from my novel. I was a wreck, my hands shaking as I stood before a small crowd, my voice barely steady. But when I finished, the applause was warm, and Jameson's smile was brighter than I'd ever seen. "You were fearless," he said later, pouring me a glass of wine in the back room. "I'm proud of you." My heart stuttered. Proud. No one had ever said that to me. Emboldened, I asked him to read something of his own. He hesitated, then pulled out a notebook, reading a poem about love as a quiet rebellion, each line raw and aching. When he finished, the room was silent, and I realized I was holding my breath. Our eyes met, and I saw something new in his vulnerability. Maybe, or desire. I couldn't tell. After everyone left, we stayed to clean up, the silence between us heavy. I was stacking chairs when he spoke. "Ethan, why do you look at me like that?" My face burned. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but the truth spilled out. "I don't know how to stop," I said. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, cedar and spice. "Be careful," he whispered. "I'm not as steady as I seem." Before I could respond, he turned away, leaving me in the dim light, my heart a tangled mess. I couldn't shake his words. "I'm not as steady as I seem." What did that mean? Was he warning me? Or confessing something? I spent the next week obsessing. My writing stalled as I replayed every moment we'd shared. The bookstore, the diner, the open mic, each felt like a step towards something I couldn't name, something I both craved and feared. I started noticing cracks in Jameson's calm exterior. He'd get quiet when I mentioned my past, my family, or love. Once, when I joked about my terrible dating history, he flinched, just for a second, before changing the subject. I wondered if he'd been hurt before, if someone had left scars I couldn't see. I wanted to ask, but the mentor-student line held me back. He was 42, established, untouchable. I was just a kid with a half-finished novel and a heart full of regrets. One rainy afternoon, he called me to the bookstore early. "I found something," he said, holding up an old photo album. Inside were pictures of a younger Jameson Lanky, smiling, standing with a man whose arm was around him. They looked happy, in love. "My first partner," he said quietly. "David. He died 10 years ago." His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened as he told me about David, their life together, the car accident that took him. "I stopped believing in love after that," he said. "Until recently." My heart stopped. Until recently. Was he talking about me? I wanted to ask, but fear choked me. Instead, I reached for his hand, a clumsy gesture of comfort. He didn't pull away, but he didn't hold on either. "You're braver than you think, Ethan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't let fear write your story." That night, I went home and wrote furiously, channeling my confusion into my novel. My protagonist started to take shape, his voice clearer, his heart more open. But in real life, I was still a mess. I couldn't stop thinking about Jameson, his grief, his strength, the way he made me feel seen. I wanted to tell him about the app, to confess my regret. But what if it ruined everything? What if he didn't even remember? The next session, I arrived early, determined to say something. But when I walked in, I saw him talking to another man tall. Handsome, maybe 35, with an easy smile. They were laughing, their body language familiar, intimate. My stomach twisted. Was this why he'd warned me? Was I just a student to him? Nothing more. I turned to leave, but Jameson called my name. Ethan. Wait. This is Marcus. An old friend. Marcus grinned, shaking my hand. But I barely heard him. All I could see was Jameson's face, searching mine, like he knew I was spiraling. Jealousy was a new flavor of pain, sharp and bitter. I couldn't look at Jameson without seeing him laughing with Marcus. Their ease a reminder of everything I wasn't. I threw myself into my writing, avoiding personal conversations, keeping our sessions strictly professional. But Jameson noticed. You're distant, he said one evening, closing my manuscript. What's going on? I wanted to lie, to say it was just stress, but his eyes pinned me in place. I saw you with Marcus. I blurted. You seemed close. His brow furrowed, then softened with understanding. Marcus is a friend. Ethan. Nothing more. He paused, his voice dropping. But you're not asking because of Marcus, are you? My face burned. I couldn't do fiscal confess the swipe, the regret, the way I was falling for him. Instead, I mumbled an apology and changed the subject. But the tension grew thicker, our sessions charged with unspoken words. I started noticing small things, how he'd linger when we said goodbye, how his hand brushed mine more often, how his smiles felt like secrets meant just for me. One night, the bookstore hosted a literary event, a reading by a local poet. The place was packed, the air buzzing with excitement. I helped Jameson set up, our hands brushing as we moved chairs, our eyes meeting too often. After the reading, as the crowd thinned, he pulled me aside. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice low. My heart raced, expecting a confession. But instead, he handed me a letter from a publisher. They wanted to see my full manuscript. You did this, he said, his eyes shining. I'm just the guide. I was floored, gratitude and longing crashing together. Without thinking, I hugged him, my arms tight around his shoulders. He stiffened, then relaxed, his hands resting on my back. For a moment, we just stood there, the world fading away. When we pulled apart, his face was unreadable, but his eyes were dark with something I couldn't name. Ethan, he started, then stopped, shaking his head. We need to talk. Not here. We ended up at his apartment above the bookstore, a cozy space filled with books and soft light. Over coffee, he told me about his life after David, how he'd closed himself off, how mentoring me had woken something in him. You make me want to try again, he said, his voice raw. But I'm your mentor. It's complicated. My heart pounded. I wanted to tell him I felt the same, that I'd felt it for months. But fear stopped me. Instead, I nodded, promising we'd talk more soon. The publisher's interest lit a fire under me. I revised my manuscript with a focus I hadn't had before. Jameson's belief in me a constant fuel. But our personal conversations stayed on hold, both of us tiptoeing around the edge of something bigger. I wanted to confess everything the app. My feelings, my fears, but every time I tried, the words caught in my throat. One evening, as we worked late, a storm rolled in, thunder shaking the bookstore's windows. The power flickered, plunging us into darkness. Jameson lit candles, their glow casting shadows on his face. Looks like we're stuck, he said, half smiling. We sat on the floor, surrounded by books. The storm a perfect excuse to talk about anything but work. I asked about David, wanting to understand the man who'd shaped Jameson's heart. He spoke softly, his words heavy with love and loss. He taught me to be brave, he said, but losing him made me forget how. I reached for his hand, this time not pulling back. You're braver than you think, I said, echoing his words to me. He looked at me, his eyes searching, and for a moment, I thought he'd kiss me. Instead, he stood, breaking the spell. We should get back to work, he said, his voice tight. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. I arrived at the bookstore with a plan to confess everything. But when I walked in, I saw him on the phone, his face pale. It's my sister, he said after hanging up. She's sick. I need to go to Montana. He looked shaken, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen. I offered to go with him, but he shook his head. This is something I need to do alone. He left that night, promising to be back in a week. While he was gone, I poured my heart into a letter, confessing the swipe, my regret, my feelings. I tucked it into my manuscript, planning to give it to him when he returned. But the week stretched into 2, and his text grew sparse. Doubt crept in. Had I misread everything? Was I just a student to him? A project to fix? When he finally returned, he looked exhausted. His eyes shadowed. She's stable, he said, but his voice was flat. I wanted to give him the letter, but the timing felt wrong. Instead, I asked how I could help. He smiled, a ghost of his usual warmth. Just keep writing, he said. That's enough. Jameson's return changed things. He was distant, his critiques mechanical, like he was building a wall between us. I missed the warmth, the connection, but I didn't know how to reach him. My manuscript was nearly done, the publisher's deadline looming. But the real deadline was us, whatever we were, whatever we could be. One night, desperate to break through, I invited him to dinner at my place. To my surprise, he agreed. I cooked pasta. Nothing fancy, but the act of cooking for him felt intimate, vulnerable. We ate in my cramped kitchen, the silence comfortable at first. Then I asked about Montana, about his sister. He opened up, slowly, telling me about their strained relationship, how her illness had forced them to confront old wounds. I've spent so long running from pain, he said. I don't want to do that anymore. It was my chance. I took a deep breath, sliding the letter across the table. Read this, I said, my voice shaking. He opened it, his eyes scanning the pages. I watched his face, waiting for anger, rejection, anything. When he finished, he looked up, his expression unreadable. You swiped left, he said, almost to himself. I remembered you. Ethan. Your profile picture, those eyes. I was hurt, but I let it go. My heart sank. He'd known all along. I'm sorry, I whispered. I was scared. Stupid. I didn't know you then. He stood, pacing, his hands in his hair. Do you know how hard it's been? He said. Mentoring you, wanting you, knowing you'd rejected me once. His voice broke, and I realized he'd been holding back as much as I had. I stood, closing the distance between us. I'm not rejecting you now, I said. I'm here. Jameson. I'm all in. For a moment, we just stared, the air electric. Then he kissed me, fierce and desperate, like he'd been waiting years for this. I kissed him back, my hands in his hair, my heart racing. It was everything messy, perfect, terrifying. That kiss changed everything, but it didn't solve everything. We were still mentor and student, still navigating a past marked by my rejection and his grief. But we were honest now. No more hiding. We agreed to take it slow, to let our relationship grow alongside my novel, which I finished and sent to the publisher the next week. Jameson read the final draft, his eyes shining with pride. "This is you," he said. "All of you." The publisher loved it, offering a deal that felt like a dream. But the real victory was us 12 men who'd found each other despite fear, loss, and a swipe left. We started dating, quietly at first, keeping it separate from our mentorship. The bookstore remained our haven, where we'd steal kisses between shelves, our love a quiet rebellion against the world's chaos. One evening, as we closed Harper's Haven, Jameson took my hand. "I was scared too," he admitted. "After David, I thought I'd never feel this again. But you made me want to try." I squeezed his hand, my heart full. "You made me brave," I said. "I'm not running anymore." We stood in the doorway, the city alive around us. And I realized this was the story I'd been trying to write all along, not just in my novel, but in my life. A story of second chances, of choosing love over fear, of finding home in someone else's heart. The tension that had once been unbearable was now a promise. A reminder that even the smallest choices like a swipe could lead to something extraordinary.